wherever you are, welcome. My name is Mike Rizzo, and I'm the Senior Growth Marketing Manager for the InMobi Publisher Platform. I'm really excited to be here with all of you, and I would like to say thank you for joining us. Thanks for taking the time. So before we get started, I just want to cover some logistics. We've reserved the time at the end of the webinar for questions. Please use the questions window to type out your questions, and we'll answer as many of them as we can at the end. The webinar should be approximately 40 minutes. We totally understand that your time is valuable and sometimes things come up. So if for any reason you need to leave a little early, rest assured that we'll send the recording of this one, that you use some headphones and keep the volume up high, at least high enough to hear us. And then in the event that you need any help with audio, please use the chat window and we'll try to help you out. So as you may have heard, in January of this year, InMobi acquired AirServe to create the world's most powerful mobile video advertising and monetization solution. InMobi is the world's largest independent mobile advertising platform that specializes in delivering the best ROI for mobile marketers. A mobile-first and mobile-only platform, InMobi has been pioneering the next generation of video ad experiences, deep learning-based optimization algorithms, and header bidding to deliver maximum value to advertisers, users, and publishers. Today, we're excited to share the first of many webinars meant to help publishers just like you better understand the mobile on the Essential Mediation Toolkit. We'll also help you understand the challenges with the traditional mediation waterfall and get to the differences between header bidding and a truly. Our goal today is to leave you feeling well equipped to maximize revenue and yield from your mobile monetization strategy. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our webinar speaker, Andrew Gerhardt. He was previously the co-founder and COO of AirServe and is now the VP of Publisher Platforms at InMobi. I'm gonna go ahead and transition over to Andrew here. Give me just 1 second.
Thanks, Mike. Pleasure to be here. Today, we're going to cover a few different topics. Please feel free to ask me questions along the way or type them into the window and we'll address them at the end. We're going to start talking about what the goal is for a mediation platform and for your ad monetization strategy and how that fits into your choice in a mediation layer. We're going to look at how mediation platforms and how the market has shifted over the past years. And again, how that impacts how you monetize your inventory and the platform that you use. We'll wrap that into challenges with some of today's technology. We'll talk about header bidding, and we're going to wrap up with some best practices in mediation. So, what is your goal? Well, at a core, we want to make as much money as possible while annoying as few as possible, right? And what that means is we're maximizing our ARPDAU. ARPDAU is average revenue per daily active user. So we want to maximize our revenue, but we also want to ensure that we're maximizing our lifetime value. Again, we don't want to annoy users. We don't want to lose users. Nobody wants to get bad App Store reviews. So we don't want to impact our user retention. And then lastly, we want to spend the least amount of time worrying about ad monetization. It's not just the monetization team, but also our engineering, building out an ad server, building out reporting APIs, managing a waterfall, all of those different things. There's better things you could be doing with your time to ensure that you're building a profitable and sustainable business. So those are the three goals. We'll keep those in mind as we move forward. Now let's talk about how the ad market and the landscape has shifted over the years. It's been a long time since AdMob first started in 2006, and the landscape has shifted pretty dramatically. So let's look at that. In the past, the App Store market was still forming. You had apps coming and going. The top rankings would change quite a bit. And similarly, we had the ad tech market was still forming. You'd have different ad networks, exchanges coming and going. And the combination of those two things meant that most of the mobile ad spend was dominated by performance-based buyers. There's the lifts, the machine zones, spending time on mobile from those apps. What we also found is that most of the inventory was purchased in mass, right? It'd be purchased in bulk at the app level at fixed rates. And then, back in the day, it was mostly the US market that was booming. booming primarily from static formats. So how have those things changed? Well, now what we see with the App Store charts today, it's primarily dominated by the large players. Now, we still have some great stories about apps coming into the top things, but primarily we see the large players like the Facebooks and the Zyngas that are dominating those charts. Similarly, we've seen a lot of consolidation in the ad tech space. Just today, 2 acquisitions were announced. And so that's been a similar story over the past couple of years. There's been a lot of consolidation in the space, both on the ad tech side as well as with publishers and apps. What we've also seen is a huge explosion in programmatic ad spend. Start out in desktop, mobile web, it's going cross-screen now. We're seeing huge amounts of programmatic ad spend in mobile app as well as in OTT. Another big change has been the introduction of brands. So again, in the past, a lot of the ads that you would see were from other apps that were trying to get installs. Over the past few years, we've seen brands really coming in to bring a larger balance to mobile ad spend. And the way that they transact in mobile is quite different from performance-based buyers. Instead of the buying being done at an aggregate level, these brands want to really find the needle in the haystack. They're buying at an ADID level or an impression level. Important to know when we're choosing a platform and how we're setting up our ad stack. Lastly, what we're seeing is that the market is far more mature, right? And so years ago, the US market was booming, a lot of static formats. Now we're seeing explosion in China, in APAC, in all these international markets. And what we're seeing is that the brand-based buyers and even performance buyers are moving toward these engaging formats like video and playable ads and interactive units that allow them to drive better performance for their ads. So the market shifted quite a bit. It's important to understand how that impacts our platform and how that impacts our ad stack. So what are the biggest things? Well, waterfalls really aren't built great for programmatic ad spend. Why is that? Well, a few different reasons. Waterfalls are best when we know the pricing of our demand. So for example, let's say I'm working with 3 different ad networks. One of them's at $10, one of them's at $7, one of them's at $6. It's really easy for me to determine who to hit first, right? 10, 7, 6. The problem is that's really not how programmatic works. Programmatic buyers come in at all different prices. User A, they may be able to pay $10.25. User B, they might only want to pay $2.50 based on the characteristics of that user. And so the way that I work with these buyers has to change dramatically. The other thing is that programmatic buyers really feed off scale. They need to see the entirety of my inventory to be able to find that needle in the haystack, to be able to find the user they're looking for. When we think about all the hundreds of thousands of campaigns, they all different. So some of those campaigns may be based on gender. Some of them may be looking for specific demographics. And they need to be able to see all of my inventory so they can price it accordingly and find those users. What we find is that when they're lower in the waterfall or they only see a portion of my inventory, they may perform worse and the results may degrade over time. The other challenge that we have with some of today's technology is that it's not able to consume the programmatic or dynamic pricing. And so as I talked about earlier, when we have static pricing at $10, $7, $6, very easy to rise my demand. But we need to be able to consume that dynamic price on the impression level. And so instead of it being $5 overall for the entire app or the entire brand or buyer, it may be individual pricing at the impression level. A big challenge is that waterfalls are quite tedious and difficult to manage. So if I only have 3 buyers, sure, that's easy. What we find is that publishers at scale have many apps, they have many ad units, and they're optimizing at a geographic level. And so all those different combinations lead to hundreds and hundreds of ad lines, sometimes thousands of ad lines. And these waterfalls become very, very tedious to update on a regular basis. And again, we go back to our goal. The third goal was not spending a lot of time managing. And so I can't have a team of 10 or 20 or 30 people updating these waterfalls every day. I need it to be easy to use so that I can drive my business forward. Another challenge with some of today's technology is the slowness. We know that in mobile, it's extremely important to have a great user experience with low latency, the ads showing up right away. And the challenge is at scale with those, with 10, 20, 30, 50 ad lines for a given ad unit. If nobody fills at the top, there is inherent latency as they go down that waterfall. So every ad call could be 400 milliseconds at best. It may even be 800 milliseconds or worse. And so adding those all up, it could lead to a very slow and painful user experience. Another big thing and common theme within the publisher landscape is really transparency. Within a lot of today's technology, you may be able to see how many impressions get delivered. You may be able to see how much revenue you've earned. If you're lucky, you'll see fill rate and the true fill rate. But the challenge is there's so many more metrics that give you insight into your ad monetization business. Do you really know the true fill rate from each buyer? Do you know how many ads were cached on the ad server? How many ads were cached on the SDK? If there's a timeout with a buyer, are you able to see that and work through that issue with the buyer? Do you know if they didn't win the auction, why? These are really important metrics to be able to optimize your business and get insights into what's going on. So we've identified that the market's shifted, right? The programmatic is now huge. Waterfalls are not necessarily conducive to the new way that ads are delivered. Enter header bidding. Obviously a very popular term nowadays, especially things are starting to grow in app. There's been a lot of articles recently, but what we found is that not many people know what header bidding really is. They don't know how to integrate it, and they don't understand how they should use it to drive their business and drive their ad revenue forward. So let's take a look at what header bidding really is. Header bidding is a programmatic tool. It was designed to allow publishers to bring programmatic demand into their waterfall system. Header bidding at its core is a hack. And I know a hack is sometimes a dirty word, but it really is, because a lot of publishers will be using waterfall-based systems, and there wasn't a great way to work with these programmatic partners inside the waterfall-based systems. And so header bidding was a hack to get around that. And what it means is publishers are able to call programmatic partners before the call gets to the ad server. And so in a desktop environment, it's made as part of the header. I call out to my header bidding partners, whether that's an exchange or an SSP, and those calls are made simultaneously, which is great. And then the result of that is then passed into the ad server. Within the app environment, that is sometimes injected into a specific slot in the waterfall. So that's typically how a publisher will work with a header bidding partner. It's usually in conjunction with a waterfall-based system. There's obviously some benefits to using header bidding, and a lot of publishers are seeing good results with header bidding. Why? Well, it allows me to capture some incremental yields. If I wasn't working with that programmatic partner before because of some constraints, now I can bring in their demand. I can hopefully capture some higher CPM demand from that partner and pass it into my ad stack or the waterfall. If I previously was working with that partner as part of the waterfall, I can minimize some latency by now calling them simultaneously before it gets into the waterfall, right? So I'm taking some partners out, I'm minimizing some latency, I'm using that simultaneous ad call. Those are certainly positives. And then lastly, again, if I'm taking people out of the waterfall and not using passback tags, I'm minimizing some leakage that can often be found within the waterfall. So there's certainly some benefits to the header bidding technique, but I called it a hack. So obviously there's some downsides as well. One of which is it's still disjointed. I'm passing the winning bid into the waterfall, right? So I'm still have a header bidding auction on top of a waterfall, then it gets passed in. I have two distinct systems. Another big thing that some publishers don't realize is there's some offset timing with my programmatic partners. let's say I'm working with 3 exchanges or SSPs in my header bidding partner or header bidding wrapper, and I call out to them. Well, inside my waterfall, I'm also working with some exchanges and some networks. Oftentimes, those exchanges will be calling to the same DSPs or trading desks. And so I may be working with a partner in my header bidding container, and I may be working with an exchange in my waterfall, and they're both calling to the same trading desk. Well, if the person in my header bidding container is called first, they're getting an unfair advantage. And so it's going to degrade the results of the partner that's in my waterfall. And so that offset in timing has unintended consequences oftentimes. Something that you should be aware of when you implement a header bidding solution. You may see a decline in performance from the partners in your waterfall. And then lastly, a big deal is now you have 2 different systems, right? If I have a header bidding solution that's on top of my waterfall, now I have to manage that. I also have to manage my waterfall. I have to look at reporting in both systems, manage price floors in both places. It can be a little bit cumbersome and tedious. So the market's changed. Waterfalls really haven't kept up with programmatic. Header bidding took it a step forward and brought some advantages for publishers, but it's still somewhat of a hack. What is a publisher to do? This is where unified auctions come in. What is a unified auction? Well, at its core, it's a comprehensive, simultaneous auction across all demand sources, across all ad sources, whether they support dynamic bids or not. And that's really the main benefit, is that we're calling everyone at the same time. And for those partners that can submit a dynamic bid, we're able to pull that into the auction and influence the algorithm. Why is this better? Well, we're now able to determine the maximum price per individual impression. Instead of that only being at the header bidding level, now it's across all demand sources. We're able to see who can pay the most for each individual impression. It also puts all buyers on equal footing. And so every buyer is able to see all the inventory and submit whether they have an ad and what they're willing to pay for it, which means that we're now flattening the waterfall. It's not that we have header bidding on top of the waterfall. We now have eliminated latency because we're calling all partners at the same time. We've now also eliminated any leakage in impressions or latency in passback tags because they're no longer needed. If I'm working with a partner, I don't even need a tag-based partner. I don't need passback tags anymore because it's all called simultaneously. And then lastly, if we go back to our goals again, it was to make more money and spend the least amount of time. Now I'm minimizing the tedious work managing the waterfall. The unified auction is calling all partners at the same time, receiving the bids, and determining who to serve based on the highest price. The other pro of a unified auction is that we're maximizing the ads that we can cache. And so instead of calling one partner at a time and determining if they have an ad, and if they do, we serve it, now I can call all of my partners and I can receive bids and cache the ads for later use. And so I'm maximizing my fill rate presently and in the future. So we've talked about the market shifting and how unified auctions are really the way forward in terms of the evolution of ad serving and mediation layers. Let's talk about some best practices and tips and tools for making sure that you're maximizing your ad revenue. One of the things we see with publishers using mediation platforms successfully is using multiple price tiers across their partners. What we find is that there's a balance here. Some publishers will go a little bit aggressive and put too many price tiers. They may have 10 or 15 different price tiers for a partner. What we found the optimal is about 3 to 4 prices. What this means is that for buyer A, you can have a price tier at a high price line to capture their premium demand. You can also have one in the middle of your stack and then one at the bottom. This allows you to capture higher CPM demand as well as the higher fill rate demand at the bottom. Another big important thing is to pay attention to regional differences. Again, especially as the markets are exploding in China and APAC and internationally, if you have those international users, you can't assume that the same buyers that purchase your inventory in the US will also be your best buyers in those other markets. The prices are going to differ. The maturity of the market is going to differ. And so if you work with, let's say, video in the US, it may be that you need to think about a different ad format for your business in Latin America or in whatever emerging market it is. So those are some differences that you really need to understand and work with your platform partner for recommendations on those particular regions. If you set a price floor for $10 in the US, it's more than likely that your price floor will have to change per region. Another big thing is to ensure you're maximizing the server-to-server connections you're using. A lot of publishers will work with a great deal of SDKs. SDKs can be rates, and so you need to understand what the buyer landscape looks like and optimize your stack accordingly. One of the great tools that we've seen publishers use is working with ad units and technology that allows them to integrate multi-ad units. What that means is if I have a 300 by 250 and I'm monetizing with video in the US, can I backfill to static? Can I backfill to an interactive unit? Or similarly, if I have a native ad unit, but the native ad unit doesn't have 100% fill rate, can I backfill with display? Those are things that you should be able to do and allow you to capture the highest price demand for that individual unit across ad formats. A big thing is making sure you're looking at how your buyers are impacting your stack. So, ad networks, ad exchanges, agencies, DSPs, all of them are going to be different in terms of how they're set up and the demand that they have. So you need to keep a close eye on their errors if they're sending through campaigns that have issues. You need to keep a look at what their latency is and how that's impacting your performance. Look at their failure rates of the SDK, crashes, and having transparency into what's going on within the ad stack. So that's something that's we find can be extremely helpful for optimizations. One of the key things that you can do to maximize your revenue, but also to minimize the time it takes to update your stack every day, is to implement the auto ingestion of CPM and revenue impression data from the ad networks you're working with. Most of them will have a reporting API that can pull back those key metrics and then update your mediation platform. It's really important that you implement that reporting API so that you have an accurate algorithm and an accurate auction every single time. We've put together some additional resources for you about mediation, about the difference between header bidding and waterfalls and the InMobi open auction product. So we'll send this out and please feel free to peruse those on your own. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to pass this back to Mike real quick and look forward to talking with you again.
Thanks, Andrew. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. We do have a couple of questions from the audience. So I'm just going to read those off and see if Andrew can get us some answers here. So it looks like the first question is, what do advertisers think of unified auctions?
So the advertisers we've spoken to have been big proponents of it. I mean, we've seen a lot of the ad networks very excited and jumping on board with regards to changing their infrastructure to support dynamic bidding. I think they need to get used to this new landscape. In the past, ad networks were always jockeying for position on the waterfall. They'd have to pay huge guarantees, huge CPMs, and oftentimes others were just stuck at the bottom. Now ad networks and exchanges with a unified auction are able to see all the inventory and able to price the inventory accordingly, right? And so we've heard some crazy stories about an ad network paying a $300 CPM for the first look or for the first impression in the auction. And so there's certainly benefits to them being able to actually see the inventory and submit the real price for that individual impression. So we think that buyers are excited about it. It's an education process on our side to explain how the technology is changing, because it is a large shift. Looks like the second question is, what is preventing the widespread adoption of unified auctions? It's a good question. I think it takes the market some time. Some of these partners don't have the technology needed, and so as I mentioned, it is a change in their infrastructure. If an ad network was primarily IO based, now they have to build a bidder. It could be, a large change. It may take them some time, but I really think it is the way that the market is moving. So it looks like another question is, does mediation also work for mobile web in addition to mobile apps? Absolutely. Mediation layers, especially, and InMobi in particular, works across mobile web, building out infrastructure for OTT, and the open auction model also works across different screens. So the open auction or unified auction works for mobile web as well. We have a question here. There are so many mediation platforms. Which one or a few ones do you recommend for puzzle game publishers? Well, I think it depends on the characteristics of that puzzle game. So what ad formats you're using. Are you monetizing with display, with native, with interstitials, with rewarded video? I'd like to understand more about what that puzzle game is using. We have to connect to different ad networks, Ad Colony, Google, Facebook, and prioritize those ad sources, right? The unified auction changes that model and gets rid of the waterfall. And so all of those partners are called simultaneously. And for those that can submit a bid, the bid is then used to determine what ad to serve. So I don't think it's mediation or open or unified auction. The unified auction is a part of the mediation platform. We have another question. What are the primary differences to consider regarding unified auction for display versus video? I think it's a function of buyers. So it'll be which ad networks or exchanges you want to work with and include in your auction. I think it's also a consideration is the caching mechanism. So if I'm working with interstitial video, if I'm working with rewarded video, oftentimes I'm heavily pre-caching. So that'll be something that influences the auction. But quite honestly, the unified auction really is across different ad formats. The way that we work with, it's really just a way to work with our buyers and the way that we call for ads. And so it shouldn't be too different, whether I'm working with banner or native or interstitial video or rewarded video. It just allows me to eliminate the waterfall and call all of my partners at the same time. Great question here. How do you incorporate partners that don't support dynamic prices into the auction? That's a great question. So there's a couple different ways. What we found is that the market is split in terms of support for dynamic prices. There's a lot of great partners that do support it, but there's also some partners that aren't there yet. So there's some ad networks that, for the ad networks that do not support dynamic pricing, we have a few options. One, we can just use their flat CPM. right? And so if an ad network or an ad exchange doesn't support dynamic pricing, but we know their average CPM is, call it $6, we can use that price in the auction or in the algorithm. So that's our default. And but if the ad network also has the reporting API, which gets updated sometimes as frequently as 15 minutes, sometimes it's an hour, we can use that more recent data and pull that into the system and use that price for the auction. And so that's, I view it as almost a progression, in the old days, and for those partners who don't support dynamic pricing, we can still use the default CPM, our average. The next step is updating that average with the most recent data from the reporting API. And then the next step is using a dynamic price based on whatever bid they have. And so I view it as a progression. And hopefully, over time, all of the buyers move towards that latter stage in the progression funnel.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. And thanks, everybody, for being so engaged and asking such great questions. If we didn't get a chance to answer your question, we are going to post Andrew's email address so that we can try to follow up with you. If you have any further questions, feel free to use that and reach out. As a reminder, again, we are going to send this recording out to everybody who registered. So if you dropped off for a little bit or you were unable to make it for the beginning, don't worry, it'll come your way. Please do check out the resources in our resources section here. Stay tuned for the next webinar. We're going to be doing another one shortly. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are.